Hello, this is a lecture on chapter 6, 8, and 9 in Gerard Hauser's textbook. Um, I want to say that these chapters are really very deeply based in Aristotle, so they serve as good preparation for our next set of readings, and Aristotle's one of the key players in rhetoric. Note, however, that this is Hauser's take. When we get to Aristotle and we're reading the primary text, I'll probably take some different directions on things. So this is Hauser's take, and it's a good preview of some of the terms and concepts that we'll be seeing in Aristotle. The chapter 6 is focused on invention. Invention falls under the category of logos in Aristotle. The importance of invention is that we have to create arguments. We have to build them. The character of rhetoric is dynamic and emergent, and it's not enough just to use past experience. We can't just say what we said yesterday. That is the very nature of this rhetorical enterprise. It's specific, and it changes with time. So the question is, where do we find these arguments? We find them through the process of creativity. It's kind of interesting, I think, that Hauser uses this term creativity and puts it under logos, because the term logos is obviously the root of the concept of logic, and we don't think of creativity and logic as being similar. However, in order to invent an argument, in order to create an argument, we need to think about three things and understand three things: conflict, novelty, and ambiguity. We need to understand the tension that's going on. There are many directions that we're pulled when we have a need for an argument. There are lots of views expressed. In addition, we need to recognize and understand the novelty of the situation. What makes this situation different from past situations? Again, we need to apply arguments rhetorically to the emergent nature of the situation. In addition, we need to understand what's ambiguous, what things are not clear, what needs to be clarified in order to function. So these are ways that we can generate arguments or create arguments. Now, Hauser, again, an interesting contrast that we can't use past experiences as our only way of dealing with invention. However, Hauser mentions the concept of frames, and frames are using past experiences in order to imagine new ones. But it's not so much that we use old arguments, so much as that we use known situations from which to argue. And I'm just going to give you an example from a meeting that I was at today and a rhetorical failure of mine. In this meeting, there was one of my male colleagues kept talking over some female colleagues. And I really felt that I had two problems. One, I was really reacting to the fact that it was a he, not letting she's speak, because I'm a feminist, and I just really, that was bothering me. The second thing was, however, that I think we needed to hear these arguments. I actually agreed with the male colleague, but I knew that that was not a place for compromise. Now, instead of pulling out the argument and saying, I'd like to hear more about what Sue has to say about this, she started to say, such and such. In other words, the frame of, I'm not sure I understand. This is something I'd like to hear more about. So that frame of inviting someone else to speak. The other frame, and this is the one I chose, was to call out the sexism and saying, look, you're not letting the women speak. Now, I call this a rhetorical failure because I don't think it took into account the goals of what I wanted to do, and it really created hostility in that. So that frame, what I've done is now changed the argument to be not about the content, but about the behavior of the individual speaking. And the frame is, because I chose that frame, things got misdirected. So these frames can work for us and they can work against us. The next chapter is on ethos. So ethos is credibility. We have several murky things going on with ethos. One is the problem of authority. We like to think that some people have authority in ways that others don't, and I would agree that they do. So I'm going to be more interested in what a cancer researcher has to say about cancer than I am some bloke on the internet who wants to sell me vitamin C to cure cancer. But the question that we have to ask is what counts as authority? This expertise and power that we ascribe to speakers or to authorities are socially constructed. If you don't accept science as an authoritative domain, then you're not going to make the choice that I made with regard to the cancer researcher. If you have the assumption that cancer research is actually blocking claims about nutrition and so you don't trust it, well, that frame of mistrust is going to lead you to this ethical or credibility problem of not seeing authority in the scientific thing. So authority is socially constructed. In addition, character is a problem. Character is based on values in a given culture. So if we don't share values about what a good character is, then we're going to have problems. So if we are appealing to a value that is not shared by our audience, then we're not going to establish that. Again, character is socially constructed and based on our values as a culture. The additional thing that gets in the way is the inside-outside nature of ethos. That is, what do we know about the speaker when we come to the rhetorical event? And how relevant is that? Aristotle and Hauser both say that, rhetorically speaking, ethos or credibility is inside the speech, and it needs to be socially constructed. Now, I don't think that either of these arguments rule out our knowledge of a speaker from outside of the place. I think that, rhetorically speaking, Hauser and Aristotle definitely want to locate credibility within the text. On pages 160 and 161, Hauser lists some ways that we might generate ethos with an audience. And he uses the AREV, and this is based on George Use. So A is seeking agreement, R is recognizing rational autonomy, E is the equality of the listener and the speaker, and V is that there's intrinsic value in the argument, and so on. So this is one strategy of establishing ethos, and we can talk a lot about the ways in which we establish ethos. One of the things that I noticed in your writings about Reagan and Bush had to do to some degree with ethos and how seriously you took the two speakers, how engaged you really felt they were in the loss. And that kind of touches on both pathos and ethos. But again, that's socially constructed, our knowledge of that. We develop that and share these things as a culture through language and signs. The last of the chapters has to do with emotion, and that's pathos. Emotions are based on judgments. So we have certain emotions because we've drawn conclusions about things. So if we feel that fairness is a value, then we might appeal to unfairness because we know that our audience has made a judgment about that. What pathos does between a speaker and an audience is it establishes a need for audiences to hear, generally speaking. And we'll talk more when we get to Aristotle on that. But some things that are important to know is that emotions are normative. That is, they are judgment-based. They are value-based. They're based on shared understandings of what's good and bad. They're unique. I don't know that I completely agree with Hauser on this, but he says we don't have a general concept of love. We have specific concepts of love. We love a husband differently than we would love a child or a dog or ice cream. Those are very unique to situations. In addition, pathos is language based, and many of you noted in your discussion boards the way language shaped your perceptions of emotion in speeches. If we curse, we're going to create a certain level of emotion. Um, we have lots of ways to doing that. Several of you mentioned the use of the term we in Reagan's speech, and I think that might serve a sort of emotional quality because it indicates a shared sense of sadness. In addition, pathos is eventful. It happens in a specific context. In other words, it's rhetorical in that way. Um, there's a lot more in these chapters. I'm not necessarily concerned about a lot of the other detail that he's got in there. He mentions in the invention section, for instance, some things about the topoi and whatever. We're going to get to that more in Aristotle. If you have questions, please write them down, send them to me via email so that we can talk more about this, and I'll see you in class.